Hello everyone, this is Tushar. We are now streaming the Laravel Nagpur October Meetup, and today we have two speakers with us, Abbas and Samuel. I'll just wait for a few minutes so that we can have few more people joining in, and then we can start with the our scheduled talks. Those who ever joined in can start commenting on the chat so that I know whosoever is online. So I see that few people have joined in. Before we go ahead with the talks, I'll just give a brief introduction about what Laravel Nagpur is and how we got started and where we are right now. So Laravel Nagpur is a small community of Laravel developers and the developers who are interested in the ecosystem of PHP. So we have formed a community, and it's been around 1.5 years since we are having the monthly meetups. Before the pandemic, we used to have meetups, the live meetups in a location, and since the pandemic, we have been organizing the online meetups. So what happens is usually the how the meetup goes is one or two speakers like voluntarily comes up and they give a talk on a topic in which they are comfortable and whatever they have knowledge in. So we have been able to successfully conduct meetup in every month, and so it's been around 18 months we are conducting meetups every month. And today we have two more speakers who are here to share their knowledge with, and we continuously are looking for speakers to speak in the upcoming meetup. So if you are interested, even if you are not from Nagpur, if you are someone who has knowledge or who wants to speak up on any topic related to PHP or Laravel ecosystem, you are invited. We publish a form at the end of the meetup, at the end of the online meetup, which you can fill and request yourself to join for the next meetup. So I think we have good enough people to start the talks, and I'll introduce the speakers first. First, I'll bring the speakers into the stream. So with me, I have Abbas and Samuel. The first talk of the day is by Abbas. I'll introduce him first, and the next talk of the day is by Samuel. So Abbas is CEO of Ranium, a company situated in Nagpur, and Abbas is working in PHP, Laravel, and Vue, such kind of frameworks from past 15 years, and he has a good hold of a lot of technologies that includes WordPress, Laravel, Vue, jQuery, and lots of stuff. And he has been our go-to speaker for last many months, and he has been the pioneer in organizing the meetups. So the first talk of the day is by Abbas, and the topic is I think Abbas will introduce the topic to you. So Abbas, I'll take you to the stream.
Sure. Hello, everyone. Let me start by sharing my screen. Tushar, you'll need to add my screen to stream.
Yes. Yeah. Now it's there.
Okay. So, hello, everyone. First of all, thanks to everyone who has joined. It gives us a great amount of joy when we see people showing interest in the meetups and joining us regularly every month, religiously since last 18 months. That gives us immense pleasure. So, on how we can how what is authorization and how to implement authorization in Laravel. So the name of the talk is Behind the Gates, and the reason is everything behind the gate is authorized. Okay. So first, as Tushar mentioned, I am the founder of Training Systems. I've been working in web development since 2008, almost 15, 16 years now. And Laravel, I've been working with Laravel since its inception, I guess version 2 or 3, way back in 2013. And these days I'm working with more and more, I'm working with Nuxt.js and Vue.js, uh, those two being my primary front-end frameworks of my preference. And you all can follow me on _Abbas at Twitter. Okay, so first we need to understand the difference between authentication and authorization. This is the basics. This is a very basic thing, and I have seen a lot of beginners, they miss the point and the difference between authentication and authorization. So let's start with that. So what is authentication? Authentication is asserting the identity of a user. Now, what does this mean? Let's see with an example. Now, suppose we have a home, we have a house. The house has an entry gate. It has a lock, and that lock can be opened only with a passcode. Now, you being a resident of that house or the user of that house, whenever you go inside the house, what you will say, I'm John Doe, and you will give your passcode, and then the house will let the entry door, the gate will let you in. So the lock on the door, what it is doing, it is asserting your identity. It is when you say, I am John Doe, and you are giving your passcode, then the lock, it identifies whether you're really John Doe with your password, and this is how it asserts your identity, and then it lets you in. This thing is called as authentication. So authentication is nothing but just identifying the user, nothing else. Then let's see, what is authorization. Authorization means whether the identified user, the user who has authenticated, he has been identified, okay, this user is John. Now whether this user has permission to perform a given action, this process is called as authorization. Let's understand with an example. So now I have entered the house. So this is the house with various rooms. Let's say drawing room, parents room, kids room, kitchen, and cooking area inside kitchen. Now you can see 3 users, 3 residents of that house on the top. All three are authenticated because they have the key to the house. They can enter the house anytime they want because they have the key. But just entering the house doesn't mean that they can access each and every room. When they enter the house has identified, okay, this is parent, this is kid. But now when they want to access a particular room inside the house, at that point of time the authorization kicks in. So you can see in the diagram that we have a kid, and he can only enter to the kids room. He has the permission to enter only the kids room. Then we have parents who can enter parents room, kitchen area, and drawing room. Drawing room also everyone can enter. So each user has been given a role, and they can access only those rooms uh, to which the role has permission to. If we take an example of kitchen, then inside kitchen, even though everyone can access the kitchen, but still not everyone can cook. To cook, you need a special role called as cook, which only parents have. So even though the child can access kitchen, but he cannot cook. So this is how authorization works. Authorization means whether this user has access or permission to perform this action. We will see all this in action in practical when we dive into the code. So if we look it in the form of a web application, so the login form is the authentication part, which identifies who you are when you are entering the application. When you are logging into the application identifies you. Okay, this person is XYZ. And what is authorization? Once you're inside the app, whether you have the ability to perform certain action, let's say to view the dashboard, to view the statistics, to edit a particular model item, to edit a particular blog post, all those things are called as are actions which needs authorization. I hope now everyone is clear with what is the difference between authentication and authorization. So authentication is who you are, who are you, and authorization means can you do that. Now let's see how to implement authorization in Laravel. I will not be digging into authentication because there are already good enough tutorials and packages available in Laravel. Default packages like Sanctum and Fortify and all those things to authenticate a user. And authentication, anyways, everyone implements that properly. I think so in their applications. So Laravel uses two concepts. One is called first. The first one is called as gates. Let's see what a gate means. Gates determine if a user is authorized to perform the given action or not. So this means for any action, it can be action like viewing dashboard, viewing statistics, whether you can change settings or not, general actions not related to a particular table record or a model. That is called as, for that we will use gates to authorize general purpose actions which are not related to any resource, a concrete model. Then the second thing Laravel uses is called as policies. So policies organize this authorization logic around a particular model or resource. So when should we use policies? When we want to authorize whether the user can view a particular record, edit a particular record, or delete a particular record. So when you're talking in terms of eloquent model, that is when policies kick in. Whether this particular user has access or permission to view, modify, delete, or perform any action on that particular eloquent model or resource. That is when we use policies. So when should we use gates? When we want to authorize any action, and when we want to authorize a particular model, whether the user has permission to modify or view any particular model, at that point of time, we should be using policies. Now let's see all this in action. I'll be switching to my code now. So I've already built a small application. This is a small task management system uh, wherein I have created account. This is standard Laravel application with JetStream. I quickly walk through the application and then explain what's happening. So this is a task management system. It uses a team concepts of Jetstream, wherein a person can create a team and then add other members to their team. Now, what we want in this application is anyone can add a task, and of course, if anyone can edit or manage their own tasks, and whosoever is the team administrator, that person can not only see or manage their own tasks, but they should also be able to see and manage tasks of other team members. So everything is in place right now, but without any authorization. The only authorization I have put in place is this is the team owner administrator. That is why he's able to see all his tasks as well as all the tasks of his team members. Now in another browser, I will log in as a member, normal member, which is not a team owner. So a team owner is able to only see their own tasks and not the team tasks. They can create their own create a new task and so on and so forth. Now, if I show you the code, this is the controller which is responsible to fetch the list of current users tasks. So this is the query, and this is I'm rendering the view, inertia view. Then this is the controller method responsible to display tasks of other team members if I am the owner. And in my blade files, in my view files, what I have done, I have just checked whether the current member is admin or not, and I have hidden this link. If it's not admin, then this link is not shown. So when I'm logged in as member, what I have done is I've hidden the link for team tasks page. That this is what I have done till now. However, I have not put in place any real authorization logic at all. Now, normally what we may think is if the link is not viewable, then the user, then let's say member logs in, then he won't know whether there are team tasks or not, and he will not be, the user will not be able to view any other tasks because he can only see their own tasks. However, this assumption is wrong. So let's say I'm going inside my task, I can see my task, I can edit and delete my tasks. Now what I can easily do is from the URL, I can change the ID. Now I'm looking at the owner's task, team owner's task, even though this task doesn't belong to me. Why did this happen? Because I have not put in place any authorization logic on the task show page. Just because someone is not seeing the task in the list, it doesn't mean they cannot view it. For that, we have to put some authorization logic in place. Similarly, I'm not seeing the team task page. The owner is only the owner is able to see the team task page. I'm not able to see it, but what I can do is I can simply modify the URL. Bingo. Now I can see other users' tasks. Again, the same issue. Just because the link was hidden, it doesn't mean the user is not able to browse to any other URLs. Anyone can easily change the URLs directly in the browser's address bar and view other users' tasks. And not just that, they can then go in and view the details as well. So now let's start fixing this one by one. Let's see what's happening in the code. So the first thing that we need to do is in a controller method where we are displaying all the team tasks, what we need to do is we need to somehow give this access to this method only to those users who can view entire team's tasks. Okay, so for that, what we will do is, since this is not related to any particular model or eloquent resource, what we are going to do is we are going to use gate. So let's create a gate. For that, we need to go to auth service provider and we need to define a gate here. So let me quickly copy and paste the code for you. So this is how you can define a gate. Now I'm defining a gate with a name view team tasks. But this gate will check whether the current user has permission to either manage entire team tasks or read the team tasks. These functions and these permissions are coming from Laravel Jetstream. So you can write any logic here, which will determine whether the current logged in user has access to view other team members' tasks or not. For in my case, since I'm using Jetstream, I'm using Jetstream's methods here. Now, how we will call this gate and check whether the current user has access or not. So what we will do here in our controller method, we will simply call if gate allows, what should it allow? This. What this will do, it will return true if the current logged in user member, if the current logged in user has permission to view team tasks. If current logged in user doesn't have the permission, this will return false. If it returns true, or let's say if it returns false, what we want to do is abort current request with 403 forbidden error. Okay, let's see this in action. So here I am a normal member. I don't have permission to view the team tasks. Now I'm directly modifying the URL and going to team tasks page. So earlier I was able to see this page. Now it is not letting me see this page. Why? Because I have added a gate to this section. Now instead of doing this if and else, what gate provides another method, a very easy method, which is called as authorize. And what authorize will do, it will check if the user has permission to view team tasks or not, and it will throw the 403 forbidden error from its inside that authorized method itself. So we don't have to write if and else. If the user doesn't have this permission, the control will not go to the next line. It will directly exit from here, throwing an exception, 403 exception. Let's see. Yep, still not letting me see that page. Okay. Now, next is, again, I'm the member. Now I'm not able to see the listing of teams tasks, which was earlier it was letting me, now it is not letting me. However, I can still go to a view individual task page and I can still modify the URL and view a particular task. Again, this is someone else's tasks. We don't want to do this, we don't want this to happen. So what we'll do is we need to authorize edit action, show action, and we need to check whether the current logged in user has access to this model, task model with ID 1 or not. Now, since now we are dealing with a particular model record, what we'll be using is policies and not gate. Gates are used for general actions and policies are used for to authorize a particular model or particular model resource. So let's see how that happens. First, we will create a new policy. So this is the command to create a new policy, php make policy, then the policy name. And if you give this flag, then what will happen? The policy will have stubbed methods to check for create, read, update, and common CRUD operations. Note one thing, what I'm doing here is I'm naming my policy on the name of my model. I'm keeping the same name. My model name is task. My model name is task, and I'm naming the policy as task policy. Doing this, the advantage of doing this is, if I keep the policy name as same as the model name, Laravel automatically registers the policy and puts it in service container. If I don't keep the same name, then what I have to do is I have to go to a service provider and add and map the policies here. Okay, this model is using this policy. For example, task model is using task policy. Okay. But since I'm naming it as per the convention, I don't need to do this. It will automatically register the policies. So let's create the policy. Policy is created. Let's open the policy. Now, since I added that flag minus minus model equals to task while creating the policy, what happened is Laravel put all the default CRUD methods inside the policy with empty body. Now I can write my logic here. So let's start with V1, where we want to now authorize which action? Show whether the current task, the task being shown, it belongs or the current logged in user has permission to view this task or not. So for this, we will go and write the logic in here. Okay. So first and foremost, what we will do is anyone who is not in the current team, whether a normal member or the team administrator, team owner, if the tasks team is not same as current logged in users team, then simply deny. So what I can do here is if $task arrow team ID equals to $user arrow current team ID. Again, this current team ID and this team ID fields are in the respective models. Task table has a team ID field. Whenever we create a new task, so we put the current team's ID in the task table itself. And when a user logs in, whatever current team he's viewing, Jetstream puts its ID in the user's current team field. So if the task team ID is not same as user's current team ID, then what we need to do is simply return false. We don't want the user to view this task. Okay. If the team ID is same, then we need to do something more. Not everyone from the same team can view the tasks. Who can view? Only those people. Either I am the owner of the task, that is, I have created that task, or all those people who have this permission, view team tasks. So what I will write here next is if my ID, current logged in user's ID, is same as tasks user ID, then I can view, or if it allows view team tasks. So I created a policy to view the tasks. Now let's see how to invoke this policy. By default, it won't be invoked automatically. So to invoke this policy, what we need to do is we need to come here in the show method, and then we need to call this method authorize view. This is the same name that we have given to this method in the task policy. And as a second argument, I will pass the current task model object. On doing this, what happens? Laravel internally figures out which policy to call. How? Because we are giving task model. So Laravel knows, okay, task models policy needs to be invoked. So it invokes task models task policy. And in that policy, what methods will it invoke? it will invoke the view method. Now, if this view method returns false, then Laravel will stop the execution of the program here and throw a 403 forbidden error. If this view method returns true, then it will let the execution continue. So let's save this and see whether it works or not. So here I'm on the task view page, and by modifying the URL, I was able to view owner's task, even though I was a member. I wasn't the owner of the team. Now, if I reload this page, I get a 403 unauthorized error. Why? Because now I have this in place. Okay, let's go back. Okay, I'm not able to view, but can I edit? Yes. Again, this is a security issue. I'm able to edit owner's task, which I shouldn't be able to. So let me go back and let's now write some logic in here. Edit means updating the task. So let's see who all can update the task. Now, for updating, who can update? First and foremost, that user should be able to view the task. Only those who can view the task can update it. So internally, what we will do is simply call this view method. So anyone who is able to view, anyone who is able to update should also be able to view. So first, we will check whether they can view the task. If they cannot view, then of course they cannot update. So if this returns false, we will return false. But along with view, what also we need to check is whether they have the permission to manage the tasks or not. So for that, we will use JetStreams hasting permission method. This checks whether the user in the current team has permission to manage team tasks or not. That is, if I am the owner, I'm able to edit someone else's tasks, but from my same team. Or if the current logged in user's ID is same as current task user ID, then it means the task belongs to me. If it belongs to me, then of course I should be able to update. So this is how we wrote logic to check, authorize whether the user has permission to update a task or not. Now we will go to our controller and invoke that policy in here. This time we want to invoke update method of the task policy. Okay. So yeah. Now I'll show you one thing. I'll keep this as is and I'll open a new tab. Now, even on edit, I'm unable to view the form, edit form. Why? Because I have edit the authorization. But just because I'm unable to view the edit form, it doesn't mean I'm unable to update it, because I haven't still authorized my update method. So I need to go here and add the same authorization logic to my update method where the form is posted. Okay. Now, lastly, destroy. So who all can delete a task? So let's go to the policy and write some logic to determine whether the current user has ability to delete a task or not. Who can delete task? Everyone who can update a task. If someone is able to update the task, then we want that the same user should be able to delete it or not, delete as well. So for this, we will simply call this arrow update $user $task. So who can delete a task? Whoever can update. This will mean it will invoke this method and again do all this logic. And in here we will come and we will write this arrow authorize delete and we will pass on the task. So now only those users can delete this task who have permission to delete the task. What's remaining now? Okay, create. In our case, anyone can create a task, be it a member or the team owner. Anyone can create a task. But in some cases, it may happen that there is some logic in your code where you don't want anyone to create a new task, a particular person to create a new task. So for that, what we can do in here is write the logic in the create method of policy. For now, since we want that anyone can create the task, we will simply do return true. It's one thing. Uh, in all the cases, what we were doing is when we call authorize, we were passing the task model. Why? Because we want to check the permission on this current task model, which is being viewed or edited or updated or deleted. But in case of create, there is no task model right now. When we are creating, there's no task model. So in those cases, what we can do is when invoking policies, instead of the model object, since we don't have a model object, we can simply pass on the class name, model class name. So what this will do is, it will call this method. And since this will return true, it means anyone can create a new task. The same authorization should go in the store method, which is called when the create task form is submitted. Okay. Anything remaining, or are we done? This restore and force delete, this is not used in our application, so we will delete this. Now, this when invoking policies, this was one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is you can add it in the middleware itself. There are middlewares, for example, if we want that this route should be, who can view this route? Only those people who can, for example, view the post. Yeah, this is just an example. So what this will do is, if I apply this middleware, this will internally invoke again task policy, and let me write down the route. Okay, so this is the get route to view a particular task. What I can do is I can add a middleware in here and view task. Now, what this will do is whenever this route is accessed, even before going to the controller, it will invoke the policy. Which policy? Task policy. How? Because we are using implicit model binding in the route. It knows, okay, this ID, the ID that is coming in, it is a task ID. So it is related with task model. So we need to invoke the task policy. And it will also pass in the current task object to the policy. So doing this is same as writing the this. So if we are using middleware, then no need to write it here. all the authorization logic will be executed even before the control reaches the show method. So this is how you can use the middlewares to invoke policies. Now, one thing remaining is here. Right now, this and put methods, store and update methods, we submit create a creation form and updation form to these methods, and we have written it like it return the authorization logic in here. But what the other way would be to use form requests. So let's move this logic to a form request. PHP artisan make request. Save task. Okay. So when you create a form request, then let's use task request in here of normal requests. Now we will move this authorization logic from here to the form request. So whenever you create a form request, what Laravel does is it puts a authorize method inside that request. And this method is responsible now to check whether the current form submission is authorized or not. So we will remove this from here. We will put it here. Here, authorized method is not available. What we need to do is this method should return true or false. And remember, the authorized method doesn't return true or false. What it returns is if the user doesn't have the permission, then it aborts, it exits with a 403 exception. So to access, what we can do is we can fetch the current user from the request, and the user has a method called as scan. Again, this will internally call the policy. Which policy? Task policies create method. And if user can create a new task, then this function will return true. If user cannot create a new task, this function will return false. So we have moved our authorization logic from the store method to the form request. And while we are doing that, we also let's move this from controller to the form request. Okay. So now let's see if everything is working or not. Being the owner, I should be able to view tasks. I should be able to edit any task that is required field, edited task, able to save it. I can go back. I can view any member's task. All seems to be working. If I log in as member, let's see. Let's go to our dashboard. Task. Can I modify the URL and look at the team task? No. Can I modify the URL directly and try to edit someone else's task? No. Can I view someone else's task? No. Am I able to create a new task? Let's see. Yep, new task has been created. So this is how you can implement authorization in Laravel. For more details, and there are many other methods available, you can refer Laravel docs. Let me show it to you quickly. There's an entire chapter, authorization. Okay. It will give you more details on how to write gates properly, how to authorize actions using gates. If you don't want the gates to just return true or false, then you can even return customized responses from gates and policies. Then it will also let you know how to write policies, policy filters, how to authorize using middleware or user model or controller helper classes. You can even use these policies in your blade files. So there are these methods available. Can update dollar post if you're building the front end view in your blade files. If you're want to show an edit button for a post, so whether to show that link or not, what you can do is can at the rate can update post. So if this user current logged in user has access to this post, then only that edit link will be shown. Otherwise, the edit link will not be shown. So all the helper methods are available. Just go to the authorization topic in Laravel documentation, and you will see many more details about the authorization topic. Okay, so with that, I think we are almost done, and I've tried to keep this talk very short and very fast. I'm not sure if I was able to explain authorization properly or not. Hopefully, everyone got something out of it, if not everything. So, if anyone has any questions, please ask now. Thank you. Tushar, you're on mute. Tushar, you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. Thank you, Abbas, for taking us behind the gates and showing us what is there behind the gates and what is the use of gates and policies in Laravel. We'll wait for a few seconds to see if anybody has got any questions, and then if not, we can proceed ahead. So if anybody of you have got any questions related to gates and policies, even if it is not covered in the talk, you can just put it there in the chat section, and I'm sure Abbas will be able to answer it.
Come on, everyone. I don't think I'm a very good teacher that everyone understood everything I said. You can even connect me on Twitter. I'm underscore Abbas on Twitter, and you can ask questions later on as well if you wish so.
There is a question, Abbas. Is
Mhm.
there any recommended package for authorization?
Yeah. So what I have shown is was very basic way of doing authorizations, but if you want, there are packages available as well. One of the most popular package is by Spati. They have Laravel package called as Laravel Permissions. You should give it a try. It is a very powerful, very easy to use package. Laravel Permissions by Spati. I'll type as well. Okay. Any other peeps? Any questions?
Think that's all we have got, so we can proceed ahead.
Sure. Okay, thank you everyone. Thanks a lot for attending my talk. Hope to see you all again next month. Bye bye.
Yep. Thank you, Abbas. So this brings us to the next talk of the day, and that is by Samuel. I'll just give a brief introduction of Samuel before he starts with the talk. So Samuel is a senior software engineer, community leader, an open source hacker, a technical consultant. He's a full stack engineer and he has worked on biometric, healthcare, and like developer tools, and has participated in a lot of coding hackathons. He has also co-founded a startup called Hatribles, and that mainly focuses on the food delivery in Nigeria, and he leads the engineering team of that. So a lot of credentials to back up Samuel, and I'm sure you'll enjoy the talk, which is demystifying the Docker for Laravel apps. I'll give the stage to Samuel now. Samuel, you're on mute, so you can unmute and start the talk.
Okay. Okay. So thank you very much for the opportunity. So basically today I'll be talking on demystifying Docker for Laravel. So I think I will just share my screen. Um, I think I will share my screen. Okay. So this is my screen. I'll be talking about demystifying Docker for Laravel. And why this might not really be much of a technical section, writing of code up and down, I'll try as much as possible to see that anybody listening to this or following up on this talk would be able to jump in and use Docker seamlessly in his or her Laravel application. So, but before I start, just as Tushar has already introduced me, I'm a senior backend engineer, and I've built some couple of applications relating to biometrics, healthcare, and fintech system. Majorly, I use PHP Laravel in my day-to-day activities with Ruby on Rails, and currently I work for A1. So I will jump onto explaining what Docker is all about. But before I start, um, basically most engineers today, probably because of the complexity of Docker or how Docker was explained to them on how it is being used, many engineers today have the fear of using Docker for their applications, their Laravel applications. Many of them don't actually want to jump into using Docker for the applications, and they feel like, oh, it's too complex. And that is why I termed the topic demystifying Docker for Laravel applications. In the sense, I'm going to try as much as possible to explain to the barest minimum why you should use Docker, what Docker is, and what Docker is not. So, first of all, we need to ask our question, why Docker? Why do we need to use Docker? So Docker enables developers to easily pack and ship and run any application as a lightweight, portable, self-sufficient container which can run virtually anywhere. Now, I think I will have to break that down into simple terms. Now, what that sentence is just trying to say is, whenever you want to use Docker, okay, why should I use Docker for my Laravel application? In simple terms, the reason you should use Docker is because Docker can allow you to easily ship your application, or rather push your application to production as a self-sufficient container, and it can virtually run anywhere. Now, to break it down more, it is just like I'm building an application and I'm working with a team of say five, in fact, two, three developers, and then we are using different computer systems, different operating systems, and the rest of it. So the reason why I should use Docker is because whenever my Docker setup is completed, the developers that are working on the project with me, irrespective of their operating systems and irrespective of whatever systems they're working on, the application will be able to run seamlessly on each and every one of their devices because we are using Docker. So that is why we need to use Docker. So, depending on whatever explanation you've been given in time past, this is the simplest explanation on why you should use Docker. So now, the big question is, what is Docker? Well, so as I initially explained, Docker is a software container platform that you can create containerized applications. And also, when you use Docker, you can automate the deployment, and then you have fun deploying your application. You have fun shipping your application and running it very fast. Now, what is Docker? Docker is also a tool in which applications can comfortably run no matter where they are. Just as initially explained, whenever you have your Docker set up, your application can run in an environment, any environment at all, and it enables you to package your entire application with all of its dependencies with zero headache for compatibility issues or machine dependency. So whenever you're using Docker, you don't have to worry about compatibility. You don't have to worry about machine dependency, whether I'm working with a Mac or whether I'm working with a Windows operating system. When you're using Docker, you are good to go. Um, Now, before I go into showcasing some things, I need to clarify some things. Now, I've been talking about Docker, I've been talking about Docker containers, I've been talking about shipping, and I've been talking about deployment. Now, what exactly is a Docker container? Now, to break things down, first of all, I said Docker, using Docker, you can be able to ship your applications. Your application is a container and the rest of it. So now, what exactly are Docker containers? Now, if you've heard about virtual machine, you should probably understand that the concept of Docker container is similar to that of a virtual machine. So what it aims to do is that it aims to achieve a kind of isolation in terms of applications and program. Now, whenever you say somebody tells you, okay, I am using Docker to run my application, so I have different Docker containers, what he or she is trying to say is that a container contains every single little thing that an application needs to be executed. If I'm setting up a Laravel application and I name it for example, behind the gates application. Now, whatever behind the gates application needs to run would be specified in my Docker container, which means behind the gates itself as an application is a Docker container on its own. So you can think of a Docker container as a transportable box that is filled with tools and library and settings for all that is required for the execution. So whenever you want to scaffold a Laravel application and you intend to use Docker, now you need to understand that the application you want to run using Docker is a container on its own. So your application is your container, and inside your container, you have the different tools and the different libraries that will enable the execution of your application. Now, are you scared of Docker? Before I started Docker, in fact, I have been developing applications without Docker, but not really because I wanted to. I always wanted to use Docker. But for some reasons, I could not use Docker because of how it was kind of portrayed to me. And then when I asked, okay, what is Docker? When I read articles online, and I see different research publications and I see different blog posts. I see a whole lot of different things concerning Docker, and then everything looked very non-understandable to me. So I asked myself if I was ever going to do this. And then one day I calmed down and I understood the basic concept of Docker. Now, this is the most simplest way on how Docker runs. If you have this basic understanding, you can deploy any application using a Docker setup. Now, whenever you say your application wants to run using Docker, basically for Laravel, since we are talking about Laravel, there are some specific things you need to note. Now, your Laravel application, definitely when it is deployed to the cloud, it runs on the server. Now, your Laravel application uses PHP programming language, and then it also needs a database to run. Now, basically, your application in general is like a container. So you can say, okay, I want to build an application, but then this my application I want to build, I want to use Docker to set it up. So you automatically are building a container inside a Docker setup. So your application can be regarded to be a container. So basically, what you need to know is that number one, you need to specify what the Laravel application needs to run. This is the first thing that should be at the back of your mind when you want to do a Docker setup. And then when you have, okay, that at the back of your mind, okay, my Laravel application needs a server to run, it needs a good database to run, and then, okay, I'm definitely writing my Laravel application using PHP. So what you now need to do, you set up the server for your Laravel application, you set up the MySQL database, and then depending on any database you're actually using, in my own case, I'm using my SQL database. And then you now set up the PHP configuration for your Laravel application. Once you are done setting up the server, setting up the database, and setting up the PHP configuration for your Laravel application, you can now comfortably run your application using Laravel. So now, how do I start with Docker? Now, before I go to my code editor to show some one or two things, I would want to explain some certain things. Now, when you want to work with Docker, you need to actually use a tool. We call it the Docker Compose tool. It's actually a command and also a tool that enables us to scaffold applications using Docker. So basically, the Docker Compose builds a stack of application to run a complete service. Now, somebody should be asking me, okay, I want to use Docker. In fact, I saw an application that was set up using Docker, and I saw the Docker Compose.yaml file. How do I manage to generate that, or how would I generate that? Now, just as I said initially, if you want to set up your application using Docker, first of all, you need to understand that your application is like a container. Number two, you need to understand what your application is going to run onto. For example, you need to specify the server, you need to specify the database, and then you need to specify the PHP configuration for it. Once you have all these things down, now you can comfortably jump onto using Docker. So basically, before I go to my code editor, let's understand some certain concepts. The truth is, Docker is actually a very wide scope. It has a very wide scope, and it needs it needs very good education and study to follow through. So just as I said, the Docker Compose is actually it actually builds a stack of application to run a complete service. And the Docker Compose, the YAML file, is broken into different sections. Now, each section comprises or represents a single container that which when combined with each other creates a service. Now, I will explain it again. The Docker Compose actually builds a stack of applications to run a complete service. And the Docker Compose, the YAML file, is broken into different sections. So these sections represent a single container to run a service. So I would switch to my my code editor. Okay, so I will need to switch to my code editor. Okay. So I will need to switch to my code editor, and so basically now, so actually looking at this file, this is a Docker Compose.yaml file, and if you look at it at first glance, if you really don't understand the concepts behind what you are seeing here, it might be a little confusing for you. So, but before I proceed, I'm actually a very big advocate of understanding what you want to use before you use it. So basically, I need to explain some certain things. Now, initially, I said the Docker Compose the YAML file. The Docker Compose the YAML file is broken into different sections, and each section represents a single container which when combined with each container creates the service. So now this is our Docker compose.yaml file, and looking at it here is broken into different sections. Now we have different services here. We have the Nginx service, we have the MySQL service, and then we have the PHP service. Now, one thing you need to notice, the Docker Compose, the YAML file, is a YAML file, and which means that the formatting must be consistent. Otherwise, the build will fail. So when you are editing a YAML file, you need to make the formatting to be consistent, either or else the build will fail. So basically, this is my Docker compose.yaml file, and for my Laravel application to run, which is inside here, for this my Laravel application to run, all I need to do is I need to specify some commands and also specify some services that will enable my application to run. So first and foremost, I had to specify the version of Docker I'm working with. I'm working with currently the latest version of Docker version 3. Then I specify the network I'm working with. Now somebody might ask me, what are networks in Docker? So a network is actually a given name based on the project name. So which is based on the name of the directory it lives in. So you can actually check docs.docker.com for more. So you can come here and say docs.docker. So when you come to this website, you can see a whole lot of information, guides to follow you through. So that being that, we'll go back to that now. So basically, we now need to specify our services. This is one of the most important things you need to do when you really want to have a Docker setup for your Laravel application. Just as I initially explained, you need to clearly specify the services. Our Laravel application needs a web server to run, and currently we are using Nginx. Some other people might use Apache, but here we are using Nginx, and we are using Nginx for our web server. And then for our database, we are using MySQL. So MySQL for our database, and then we have our PHP configuration file here. So basically, how do we go about it? Now, first of all, since we want to specify the services we are actually going to work with, first of all, I want to specify my web server, which is Nginx. Now, for you to actually work with a particular service or set up a service in Docker, you need to download a specific image for your application. So each of your services have images already hosted on Docker, and all you need to do, depending on the configuration of your application, all you need to do is to go to docker.com, check for the specific image which you actually want to use for your application, and then you can put that here. When you run your Docker command, automatically the image will be downloaded. So this image already has been downloaded when I was doing this Docker setup and the rest of it. Now you can now specify your container name. Your container name can be anything. You can call it web server. You can call it web server, and then you can save it. You can call it whatever you want to do, something very descriptive. Now you can now specify your port. The reason for this is now, currently your application will be running on 8080. So you need to do some certain configurations that will change whatever is in your local system to match that which is in the Docker configuration file. So basically, before I proceed further to explain some of these things, there are some concepts I need to explain for people that I have actually not used Docker before, so that they wouldn't get lost along the way. Now, looking at this particular code here, you can see depends on, you can see ports, you can see container name, you can see volumes, you can see networks, and the rest of it. Now, I will explain what they mean so that you clearly understand what each and every one of them entail, so that if you are at any point going to work with a Docker the YAML file, or you going to jump into a project that has Docker, you clearly understand this concept. So somebody asked, what are volumes in Docker? Now, Volumes are actually external storage areas that are used to store the data produced by Docker containers. Now, you can see here I already specified volumes under my web server service. So I specified volumes, and I'm trying to tell the Docker file that whatever is in my root folder should be copied to the working directory, which I'll actually be working on. So whatever is in my Docker container here should be transferred to my working app directory. So whatever my Docker container generates here, I want Docker to automatically copy it to my working directory, which is the directory in which my application would run. So volumes are actually external storage areas that are used to store the data produced by Docker containers. Now, whenever you actually set up a Docker container, whatever data or whatever information that is inside your Docker container is ephemeral, which means whenever the container dies or whenever the container goes down, automatically all the information is lost. So these volumes, anytime you see volume in a Docker file, it's just like saying, okay, copy whatever is in the Docker container to what is in the working directory of my application. Now, I already explained what networks are. What networks are. Networks are just a name which is given based on the project name and which is based on the name of the directory it lives on. Now you see another command here, depends on. Now this is our web server Nginx, but our web server cannot run that way. It depends on some certain things. So for our server to run, it needs a database to run, definitely to pull data from, and then it needs a language to run. I want to explain in layman terms. If you want your web server to run, you need to specify a database. Okay, I'm working with this database, and then I'm working with this particular configuration. So this is what exactly this depends on is trying to say, that for our web server to run, this my SQL and PHP server services must run first before this one picks up. So depends on actually expresses the dependency between services. For example, as I explained, the Nginx server depends on the MySQL and PHP to set up completely. So when my SQL service and PHP service is set up completely, then the Nginx server can comfortably run. Now, someone will ask, how do I generate the Docker compose.yaml file? Now, I'm going to do something. Right here, what will happen is I would come here and then I would create a file. I will create a new folder. I will call it Laravel doc. So I will now come to my code editor and I would import that particular folder. I'll add a folder to workspace. So currently I have an empty folder. I have an empty folder. I basically just want to show us how to start a Docker, start a Laravel application using Docker, just some of basic things so that from any angle you end up, you can pick up. So this is an empty folder generally. All I need to do is I need to, okay, create my, I need to create a Docker file. So basically, all I need to do is to create the Docker compose or YAML file, just as I did in this particular folder. I will just come here and I will say build. So automatically, that Docker compose or YAML file gets created, and that is just the most simplest way of creating the Docker compose or YAML file. Now, another thing you need to understand is the Docker compose or YAML file also works with a Docker file, which is going to be specified in our PHP configuration. So just as we saw in this particular docker.compose.yaml file, we have our Nginx server, which depends on our PHP configuration here, which is clearly specified here. So, and basically our PHP configuration doesn't use any specific Docker image to run. It needs a Docker file to run, which is already created and specified here. I specified here. I actually didn't want to make this buggy for people to actually pick up. I just created a very simple Docker file, which will help us install some basic things. So this is what our PHP file is actually dependent on, and the rest of it. So basically, to use Docker for your Laravel application, just as I explained, there are some basic things you need to understand. I actually prefer that people that have to work with Docker needs to understand the basics of what they're actually going to work with before jumping on writing code and the rest of it. Anybody can copy this code and paste, but then would not really understand what he or she wants to do. So before I continue further, I would go back to my slide, and then I will explain some certain things. Now, basically, if I set up my docker.compose.yaml file, which is the configuration file of weaving containers together, what else do I need to do for my local development? Now, the file will help me to connect to containers. It will help me to run my artisan commands, and it will also grant me file permissions based on what I actually specified that the application should run on. So how is it used with Laravel? How is Docker used with Laravel? Now, basically, all you need to do is you need to spin up services you need for your current project, just as I specified here. These are services. You need to spin up the services. We have the Nginx service, which is our web server. We have the MySQL service, and then we have the PHP configuration service. So you need to spin up services you need for your current project. You need to share a development environment, and then you don't really need to worry about which platform you are running on. You just need to make sure that both your local and development environments are the same. So basically, I already talked about the Docker Compose as a tool. And one thing we also need to know is that whenever you want to spin up containers, now spinning up container, just as I earlier explained, a container can be the application you are actually working on. So if you want to start your application with Docker, let us say we have different applications running just on inside one Docker setup. For example, we can have a PHP backend using Laravel that just renders REST APIs, and then we have a front end that was developed by React, still in the same Docker setup. Now you can decide to run each of these containers or these applications differently using Docker, one by one. But then it's kind of going to be very tedious. So that is where the Docker Compose to come in. What it actually helps us to do is it helps us to run commands seamlessly in Docker. So I'm going to do something here for us to see. I'm going to do something for us to see. Currently, for you to run Docker, you must make sure that you already your Docker agent is running, and if you're on Mac, all you need to do is you just find your Docker application and then you set it up, you click, and then when it's running, you can check your tags back to see that it is running. So what do you need to do next? Now I need to check, I need to see my running containers. Okay, so basically these are my containers which I'm currently running. I have my Nginx server here. I have my PHP and I have my SQL database too. These are the images I downloaded from Docker. These are the container IDs. These are the commands I used to set them up. Now, this my Docker containers. This is the time they were created, and they are currently up. They have been up for 4 hours running, and these are the names. So Docker Compose actually helps us run this command. I can do Docker Compose. Yes. So now it's going to show me, okay, the name of my containers, the command, whether they're up or down, which is the state, and the port they are currently running now. So this is what Docker Compose helps us to do. Instead of starting these applications one after the other, all we need to do is to just use the Docker Compose command to spin up these applications. Now, what do I mean by spinning up? Whenever you've set up your application using Docker, automatically you start your applications using Docker, so you can set it up or you can run them down. But then if you begin to set them up one after the other, you begin to find out that it becomes so tedious. So what to do is you use the Docker Compose command. So currently my containers are still running, so I have to bring them down. I'll do Docker Compose down, and then it's stopping my Nginx server, it's stopping my PHP server, my this. Um, Now I want to spin them up. I can do something like Docker Compose up, and then it's creating all I need to run my my application. So that is basically how the Docker Compose tool works. Kind of tricky, but very nice if you understand the basics. So what is our goal? Our goal is to be able to spin up different applications just on one host. Now, a single Docker setup can host different applications and run them seamlessly. You can have different applications running just on one Docker setup, and then you can easily run all these applications just at the same time without the need of disturbing yourself about dependencies and the rest of it and whatever happens to that. So how this is used for Laravel is just as I initially explained: a PHP configuration file, a web server, Nginx or Apache. You need to have your database, and then it bundles your application in one package. So we looked about the Dockerfile and the rest of it. Now, one more thing I need to explain on this before we go further is this. Now, when we started before we started writing these commands here, okay, our Docker setup is still running. So I will still come back to this. So before we started running the commands and the rest of it, we needed to set up our Docker daemon. So the Docker daemon actually listens for Docker API requests and manages Docker objects such as images, containers, networks, and volume. And also, a daemon can also communicate with other daemons to manage Docker services. Now, all this complicated explanation is actually very simple. What it's trying to say is that whenever you start running your Docker application and the Docker daemon is running, all it does is that it listens for the API request coming from Docker, and then it manages all the Docker objects you have, such as your images, such as your container, such as your network and volume. And it can communicate with other Docker daemons to manage the Docker services. Now, I also explained something about the Docker file when we are talking about the Docker Compose.yaml file. As we initially said, the Docker Compose.yaml file is actually broken in different sections where each section represents a single container. So now we also explained here that this is our PHP configuration service. Now we are trying to, in our Docker Compose.yaml file, our PHP configuration doesn't use any Docker image. So just as I said, we'll use a Docker file, which we will use to build our PHP configuration. So here I specify the Docker file, which I eventually created here. So basically what this file does is that from the image on Docker for PHP, it runs this particular command and installs PHP data object MySQL, install all these extensions which we need to run our application. While I don't want to dwell on these technical specifications for now, I will explain better here. Now, a Docker file is actually a text document that contains all the commands a user could call on the command line to assemble an image. Now, if I want to call Composer update or composer install or any command inside my Laravel application, I need to specify all those commands inside my Docker file. That is what the Docker file is actually used for. And it's a text file actually. But the Docker compose.yaml file automatically picks the name and enables it to work hand in hand with it to run our applications seamlessly. So that is basically for the Docker file. Now, just a little bit of recap on what we said about Docker. Basically, we already said initially that the main aim of using Docker is to run different applications to avoid the need for worrying about dependencies, operating system, the, forgetting about the need of hypervisor, just as was done in old times, in old ways. And then we just focus on building our application, running it, shipping it seamlessly without the need for stress and everything that comes together with it. So basically, that is what we need Docker for. Now, some very important things we need to note when using Docker for Laravel is this. Number one, if you need to use Docker for your Laravel application, you need to specify what services your Laravel application is going to run with. Just as I said, as a recap, first of all, you need to specify your web server, whether you're using Nginx or Apache. You need to specify the database you are going to be working with, and you need to specify your PHP configuration. So these three things are the things that make up your Docker Compose or YAML file. When you clearly specify these things in your Docker Compose or YAML file, you are good to go. Now, the Docker file works hand in hand with the Docker Compose or YAML file in the sense that it is a text file that enables you as the user running a Laravel application to comfortably run your commands, to comfortably run Laravel commands on your application. So you don't really have to navigate to the root directory where your application is hosted and then begin to write PHP artisan commands there. Whenever you specify whatever you need to specify on your Docker file here and run your application, automatically they run because they have already been specified here in the Docker file. So basically, one thing I need you guys to take home is this. Docker, the meat behind Docker is so much and it's so plenty, and Docker is not as complex as people think it should be. The main thing you need to understand when using Docker is that you need to understand the basics of Docker. You need to understand why you need to use Docker. You need to understand what Docker is. You need to understand what do I really need to run my application using a Docker setup. And then you need to understand the advantages and disadvantages of using Docker. If at all there are disadvantages, I don't think there are at all. Now, finally, before I come to a conclusion on my explanation on using Docker for Laravel, there is actually a package you can use for Docker if you really want to use Docker with your Laravel application. It's called Laradoc. Laradoc. I will go to laradoc.io. So you can use this application for Docker if you are running with Laravel. So it says it's a full PHP development environment for Docker. So you don't really have to go through the stress of worrying yourself about a Docker setup and the rest of it. It supports variety of common services, and they have all been pre-configured to provide a ready PHP development environment. Although the concept is to use Docker first and learn about it later. And that is what I've been trying to do, to explain the basics of Docker to you. Because the truth is, when you understand the basics of what you are going to be working with, or when you understand the basics of any tool you'll be working with, it will be easy for you to flow seamlessly with it. So if you really want to jump fast on using Docker for your application, all you need to do is you can come to Laradoc, and then they provide a very good quick overview on how to use it into your application. So you say, let's see how easy it is to set up our demo stack, PHP, Nginx, MySQL, Redis, and Composer. So they have a very good explanation on how you can seamlessly use the package for Docker in your Laravel application. So the main aim of my talk and the take home, which I would actually want everybody listening to this particular discussion to take home is this. We are not dwelling more on the technical specifications of what Docker is and what Docker is not. What we are trying to do is to understand the in-depth and the bits of what Docker is, which is why you need to use Docker, how to use Docker, and what the Docker Compose or YAML file is, what the Docker Compose tool is, and everything surrounding Docker. And I think with the explanations I've given, we can easily kind of understand and comfortably use Docker for our applications. So meanwhile, I would make my slide available for all, and I have a whole lot of resources, articles, and tutorials that anybody can always jump onto that I will still share with the host later to share for everybody um, which who wants to actually delve in more. And I will really be open to answer any questions of any kind as pertaining what I've discussed so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel, for the great talk on demystifying the Docker for Laravel. I'm sure the audience have learned a lot about what Docker is and how actually can it be used for deploying the Laravel applications. If anybody has any questions on the talk, they can do it on the chat, and Samuel will answer it for you. If anybody has any questions on the Docker and how it can be used with Laravel, apart from whatever Samuel told us, you can also ask and put it in the chat section. Okay, I'm sure everybody got to learn a lot about what Docker is, and they can connect to Samuel, if not now, then later for any questions. And Samuel, it would be great if you can provide the slides and the content you just referred to in your
Yeah.
talk.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, we'll just sign off. Thank you, Samuel, once again for the talk. Abbas,
Yeah. Thank you.
thanks for you too, for both the speakers for the amazing talk. And we will be accepting the new invites for the next session. And till then, we will be signing off, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.